So if the simulation is so central to Tailspin, how did it work? Each story begins with a character with a problem. They can be hungry, thirsty, tired, or horny. I'm not making that up, right? A problem might be resolved with a simple act. So sticking with hungry, if I'm hungry and food is here, I ingest it. I take that simple act, I've solved my problem. If that's not possible, I make a plan to change things, right? A delta act, to make it so that the world is such that I can do that. So I might get food here so that I can take the simple act of ingesting it. And often one delta act spawns another, right? So if I don't know where food is, I can't get food here, so I need to change the world so that I know where food is. And there are these plan boxes that sort of chain into each other and represent alternative ways of carrying out different goals. So I'd say this is the operational logic of Tailspin. Plan box-based character behavior, or plan box-based character planning. So here's an example. Tom Bear is hungry. Getting honey isn't already a goal, so it's added to his goal structure. He needs to know where honey is, so he decides to ask someone in the world. This is one of the things available in his plan box. He goes to Wilma, and this is the kind of thing that Mumble, the text generator that was paired with Tailspin, reports at some length, right? So he walked from his patch of ground across the meadow, through the valley, to a riverbank. It goes on at some length about these sorts of things. So when he gets there, Mumble says, Tom asked Wilma whether Wilma would tell Tom where there were some berries if Tom gave Wilma a worm. Right, so we have two characters, Tom the bear and Wilma the bird. Tom wants berries, and he proposes a deal. And then Wilma the bird speculates. What does that mean? It means that Wilma is able to use Tailspin simulation mechanisms to create an imagined Tom. And this imagined Tom believes there are berries somewhere. And then she can forward simulate all the possible worlds of things that a Tom who believed in berries might do. And she is looking for benefit, right? Are any of these worlds better for me than the world in which I am now? And the result is Wilma was inclined to lie to Tom, right? Now, I think this is kind of an interesting fictional moment, right? If we think about, say, like the way Marie-Laure Ryan has talked about possible worlds as models for what fiction is, like this is a system that's generating a lot of possible worlds in this kind of interesting interpersonal moment. But if you read a Tailspin story, what appears between this period and this W is a space. Nothing about that piece of action, psychological action, is reported to the audience. It might as well have been decided by the flip of a coin. So I'd say that's an...
Sorry.
Are there other people who need to go? I'm totally fine. I'm not offended. Okay, that's an alternative in some ways to the Eliza effect, right? So if the Eliza effect is boom bust, right? It seems like it's doing so much, oh wait, no it's not. Tailspin has no boom. All this stuff that's going on under the hood, you never find out about as an audience member. And no matter how much you play with Tailspin, there's no way to get access to it. In fact, the big criticism of Tailspin is that the stories are all pretty boring. The interesting stuff is cut out, and things like walking around is reported at great length. And I'd say this is the main lesson of Tailspin. If we're creating media, games, fictions, etc., fascinating, successful, hidden processes accomplish little. Perhaps they accomplish nothing. And I'd say this is why misspun stories are popular. If you read most things about Tailspin, they don't actually have any real Tailspin output in them. Instead, they have excerpts from Meehan's dissertation, where he's talking about what Tailspin stories there used to be when it was broken before he finished it. Right? And so here's one of those stories. Henry Ant was thirsty. He walked over to the riverbank where his good friend Bill Bird was sitting. Henry slipped and fell in the river. Gravity drowned. Right? This gives you the sense there's something going on here that is not, these boring Tailspin stories, right? I mean, what's actually going on is that gravity is a character, right? And what gravity does is grab other characters and impel them downward when there's nothing supporting them. But when you fall in a river, your friends will save you. And because gravity has no friends, no one saves gravity, right? So this is the kind of thing that happened early on in the development of the system. But what it does is it gives you insight, right? It tells you some sort of simulation is going on that has some interesting fictional process as part of it. Okay, so as you might guess, my conclusion from that is in part that logics are important for critics too, right? So I think one interesting thing about Tailspin is how it reveals limits of simulation in an easily understood fashion. And I could talk a bit about unpack more of Wilma's decision to lie, but I think we're a little short on time. Perhaps less interestingly, but this is the kind of pedantic point that somehow I feel driven to make occasionally. Also, a failure to actually grapple with the operational logics in work has been a problem for interpretations. So, for example, Janet Murray argues that Tailspin has problems because its plot structures are too abstract. In fact, there are no plot structures in Tailspin. It is purely a character simulation. That's been one of the big critiques of it from the AI community. And similarly, Espen Aarseth uses it as an argument that we should not be trying to create a surrogate author. Well, in fact, there is no surrogate author. There only is character behavior. And in fact, the very next move in kind of the AI community was try to think, if people doing stuff is boring, but authors doing stuff is interesting, maybe we should be trying to simulate authors. But somehow an inquiry into how the system works and what community it came out of was not part of what was sort of considered in the bounds for cybertext. And so what could have been quite interesting interpretations, right? Murray is really interested in character behavior. Aarseth is really interested in weird machinic texts. Instead, turn out to be kind of weak, incorrect interpretations. Okay, so if I think that we might actually want to create fictional systems that express authorial ideas, there are a lot of different approaches we could take. And I'm going to be very quick running through these slides in order to get to my conclusion in a somewhat timely manner. I can take my time? Do people... all right. Then I will take my time. All right. So we'll have an even longer talk than I planned. Okay, so some of you may have heard of Leibowitz's universe system. The idea here was to create narrative worlds that go on forever. And you might be thinking like, oh, he means MMOs. He means like narrative in Second Life. No, he means the days of our lives, right? I mean, he went down and actually spent quite a while doing sort of interviewing and observation in the writing for soap opera rooms. And the way he implements this is through author goals, as I was saying, instead of character goals, right? So, for example, one of the goals that you might have as a soap opera author is to take lovers who are meant to be together and make it really hard for them to be together, right? So one of the things he talks about is like, one of his author goals is churning lovers. And one of the plot fragments that can accomplish churning lovers is something called forced marriage, where one parent forces one of the partners to get married to someone they don't really love, right? Eventually, you know, the parent will be removed or some other obstacle will come in the way of the forced marriage and it will break up. And then you have to find another way of churning these lovers who are meant to be together, right? Maybe quickly before the parent dies and removes the blackmail or whatever, you have one of them get married to somebody else and so on, right? So these are the kinds of structures that are inside Universe. And as I've been talking about, like, there are various ways of churning lovers. I guess the important point here is that the characters don't want to be kept apart. You're not just paying attention to what the characters want. You're trying to represent some other kind of structure. And if you want to play around with this kind of structure, you can actually download a free piece of software called Wide Rule 2, which is implemented by James Skorupski with advice from Michael Matthias. And you can start playing around with what essentially is sort of HTN planning, but specially made for narrative situations.